Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Meenakshi Iyer. Meenakshi is a founder and principal of North Star Solutions and Services LLC, where she partners with CXOs and their organizations in unpacking leadership at the messy middle to help their mid-level leaders lead themselves and people and change with influence and impact so that together they can create sustainable business outcomes. She prioritizes supporting women in technology, particularly those who speak English as an additional language in their personal and professional leadership development journeys. She's a certified I Am Remarkable workshop facilitator and speaker and uses her voice to inspire, inform, and create bias for action. With her cross functional leadership experience and having successfully navigated at least 3 different career pivots, I'm excited to have her share her insights with you. Well, welcome, Meenakshi. Can you tell us about how you discovered your passion or niche?
Absolutely, Angela. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for creating this opportunity to speak with your audience. How I found my niche? Well, when I look back, first of all, I know that my career is like a jungle gym, and it's only in the last about 5, 6 years I finally feel like all the pieces fit. And so I started my career in healthcare in India, and then I moved into HR training. I'm a trained English as a second language teacher. Did that for quite a bit, working with adult learners, primarily in the technology space in India. And then I moved to the US about 15 years ago as an accompanying spouse, and I had to start from scratch all over again. And after a career break, a forced career break of about 2 years, and I somehow landed back in healthcare. So what I do right now, I consider that my niche, and it's really a combination, a culmination of all the various things that I've done throughout my career. Like you, I've been in different sectors: healthcare, travel, training, people ops, and then technology implementation and adoption. And then, and in doing all this, I started seeing some patterns. So most of my work has been in project management, operations, process improvement. So I've always found myself working with people in technology, building processes in addition to building tech adoption, right? So I found that I'm in the sweet spot, the intersection of people, business, and technology. And I came to a point where when I started thinking about the next phase of my life and career, I realized that that intersection is what I need to focus on. Um, and I'm a student. So from an academic background, from an educational background, I've studied science. I've done my executive MBA with a focus on healthcare management. And I've also studied human-centered design, and to some extent, in the space of agile software and product development as well. So then North Star Solutions and Services really allowed me to bring all these different pieces from my 25-year career together in support of people development, but in the context of the fast-paced tech world that we live in. So that's how I started to focus on the niche really evolved. And I do what I do today is to focus on the mid-level leaders in the technology space, primarily in the technology space, and then women in tech, and then folks who speak English as an additional language. And that's my messy middle, really. It has many dimensions. The org hierarchy, our individual cultural and language-based identities, and genders, right? So I realized that between my lived experience and what I see around me and what I have picked up in my career, there's a lot that I can offer to support folks some of whom maybe like me in a lot of respects, but not always. And that's the joy that I get in doing the work that I do now in supporting people build their leadership capabilities, be it leading people or technology or change.
I think you do such incredible work because when I think about just, I'm trying to think back to the last article that I read in terms of the number of women that are actually in technology
Mhm.
globally,
Mhm.
especially at that leadership level. And it's less than 15% if I can't remember exact number, but I remember it was very low and it was definitely under 30%. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh.
Yes.
And then on top of it is technology can be quite intimidating for some business leaders, right? Because they don't know the full extent of what it's capable of, like how to even begin the adoption. So when you play that role and being that liaison and that facilitator in that middle, I think it's beautiful. So based on the trajectory of your success, what are some attributes of leaders or mentors who've played a key role, whether it's from the perspective where you're like, man, like they made such a big difference in my career in a positive way, or they had attributes where you're like, I never want to adopt those tendencies?
That's such a great question, and I have experiences on both ends of the spectrum. I will say, I think very early on in my career. So my first role right out of college. So I started working 5 days after I graduated from college, and nothing, none of it was planned. It just happened, and I was in this hospital setting. It was an eye hospital. So, one part of it was a not for profit, and then there was the commercial side as well, for profit division. And I used to work in the for profit division. And my first role right out of college, I was barely 20 years old, and my first role was a supervisory role. And I used to work as a I think in current day terms it's a hospital administrator, and I just started off. But I also had a huge part of my work, my day was in speaking with patients. So we in India at the time, this is 25 years ago, but we had what in the US is today referred to as patient navigators. But we had a very specific role where we helped our patients understand their diagnosis, their treatment plan, the cost of treatment, and the options. So that's what our role was. Um, but then I also had a supervisory element to that, managing staff in the outpatient department. So the leader or the founder of the hospital who had interviewed me, I think one of the things I learned from, or the way he operated, I thought he allowed me to function with a lot of autonomy, although I was very young, very new to the whole thing. And I realize now when I look back, I realize that my personal strength in that role was really being able to have empathy for everyone, and be able to sort of meet them where they are, be it staff or be it the patients. But and I think the lesson for me there was that I sometimes would choose to empathize more with the patients than with the staff. and and he would give me that feedback in a very constructive manner. So I think that's one leader that I now when I look back has had that influence on me. Another positive experience that I've had is, uh, and this is another leader that I worked with fairly recently, and I consider him one of my mentors. Um, the Taking a chance on me, because I pitched for a new role within the company, and the role was created. But he not only understood where I was coming from, but then he took it to the next level. So I was pitching to create a new department level role. He made it an org level role, and then created that opportunity for me. And he was my executive sponsor for that role. And I learned a lot. The whole concept of slowing down to speed up, really taking the time to listen, until today. So neither of us is with that organization any longer, but I'm still in touch with people that I used to work for. We all have such fond memories of him, despite him being an executive leader. And I say that because I've worked in organizations of all sizes, and executive leaders, it's very rare to see an executive leader who's in so much, who's in touch with reality, touch with rank and file, and that employees feel that sense of connection with the executive leader on a very personal level, and they each have memories around. I remember the first time I had a conversation with him, and that really left a deep impact on me, because he was also one of those values based leaders who didn't shy away from inconvenient, uncomfortable situations or conversations. If anything didn't sit well with his value system, then that was not something, nobody could push him to do it, you know. And that strength, that moral courage is something I learned from him. And to this day, I value that. On the other end of the spectrum, and not so less than desirable experience, I think, is when I worked with a leader who, was a micromanager, for lack of a better term, but a great human being. I'm still in touch with them today, and we're great friends. But there was a lot of, I struggled during the time that I was reporting to them. And it was, despite knowing that they had good intentions, they were coming from a good place, and they were really trying to help me. I struggled because I felt like there wasn't enough trust in my capabilities, and towards the end, it started like, oh, it doesn't matter what I put together. It's all going to be dissected and changed anyway. So I started losing interest, because by nature, I'm an independent thinker, and I am very capable, and I'm also not shy about asking for help. Right. So I know myself so well, and I'm like, wow. So what is it that I'm not able to get through to my leader, who feels the need to constantly sort of check my work literally. And, and I think the biggest frustration I had was it was a lot of waste of time, because we would sometimes sit together just to review an email, and it would take hours, and I'm like, can I just do this asynchronously and send it to you? It wasn't drastic. You know what I mean? While I was living it was because that was my day, right? Working with this leader. And that's the lesson I took away from that, is the scale and intensity of impact that a leader can have on their teams. Because in some roles, the leader or the supervisor, manager, whatever you want to call them, is the only contact point for that employee as far as any leadership is concerned, right? And so it's a bit of a make or break. So that was what I took away from that experience.
And thank you for sharing both sides of the spectrum, right? Because I think, especially for those who are like new grads or maybe have experienced only one leader for a majority of their career, it can be shocking sometimes when you're like, whoa, like night and day experience, right, with another person. And I think when it comes to leadership in itself, it's not easy, right? Because when you talked about that leader who gave you autonomy, trust, and then also stood firm in having those uncomfortable conversations when the values didn't align, it's very rare you can find leaders like that, because they have a lot of expectations that they have to manage upwards, right?
Yes.
And when I think about even the level of impact that leaders can make, those mid-level leaders are the ones that have a tremendous impact, because they're kind of like that bridge between your immediate leader,
absolutely,
and the leadership above. So with the work that you do, why do you think that these mid-level leaders are sometimes lost in like the segment of the talent pipeline in terms of the support that they receive, even though they play such a critical role?
And I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because one of my fundamental beliefs is that mid-level leaders in any organization, regardless of the industry or size, I consider them the backbone of any organization. And just like us, how often do we think about our own backbones, like in our bodies? And how much time do we spend taking care of our backs? Not until our back starts aching and calling for help, right? And I've been thinking about that, particularly in the last couple of years. And I think that's true for organizations as well. So the mid-level leaders, and these are anywhere from, depending on the size of the organization, it can be anywhere from 8 to all the way up to 20 years of experience. So your senior managers, your directors, senior directors, up until the VP level. So that's the level I'm looking at. And I understand that some of these titles don't translate to the rest of the world. These are more US specific. But in terms of the years of experience, that's the window. So anywhere from 8 to about 18, 20 years of experience. And depending on the kind of organization and the size and the geographical presence of the organization, they may or may not have standard leadership development and professional development programs as part of their organizational design. Some cannot afford to do that. Some have all the money in the world, all the resources thrown at it, but I'm not sure how effective they are in the long run. right? So there's all kinds there. So specifically to your question, I think that mid-level, and I've been one of those, right? So when I look back, did I get the kind of mentorship, coaching, or sponsorship? And later on, I do want to dig into these terms a little bit during our conversation. Was there any intentional support provided to me? More often than not, no. And it would have made a difference for me. So a lot of the work that I do is really to be that source of support and strength that I would have loved to have early on in my career. And also, I think the ways of working and the world of work we are in has changed dramatically. Like when I look at my own career, and just in the past 3-4 years, everything has changed so much. And I think the one thing in today's times, I think this is probably one of the few times in history, and probably the only time in modern history, that 4 to 5 generations of people are working together in terms of their age groups. People, we are living longer as human beings, so we're working longer. So it's not uncommon to find people take on second, third careers after retirement and become consultants and whatnot, or even have full-time roles. So it takes a lot of different leadership styles to make it work. And there's a lot of situational leadership that's required on us, on our part as individuals, to be successful in whatever leadership role we are in. So one reason I think why mid-level leaders can find it challenging is understanding their place in the organization, the clarity, not just based on role, but really, okay, what is the value that I'm bringing to the table? And how dispensable am I? Because I do want to say that job security, these words, I think they're going to become obsolete, if not already. So it's not about your longevity of your tenure within an organization. It's about how relevant are you in general. It's so the employee identity, or I think, is becoming more and more decoupled from that of the organization, and we're seeing tenures are becoming shorter and shorter. But when you hit a certain point in your career, it becomes challenging to really articulate the value you bring to the table, regardless of the organization you're a part of, because that plays a big role when you're in the job search market. So that's a whole nother conversation. So I think that's one, really articulating what is my biggest strength, what is my biggest skill set, and how relevant am I, and what will happen if I'm not in the ecosystem. That's one way to talk about impact, right? What would you lose? What would the organization lose if it did not have this segment as part of their talent pipeline? The second thing I think is figuring out how to lead different types of people, and not just based on age groups, but also teams are becoming more and more cross-functional, geographically dispersed, all of that. And these are all facts over the last almost pretty much the whole decade. So cultural intelligence, cultural competence, in navigating different circumstances at work that are multicultural or across different time zones and geographies and whatnot. Not having enough of training, or sometimes even exposure, you're suddenly put into that role and now you got to sort of sink or swim. So that's the second piece in what I'm seeing also with some of my work and some of my clients. The third thing I think is the pace of change and the volume and the velocity of change, really, within organizations, in the world, geopolitically and otherwise. There's so much going on, and invariably mid-level leaders are, what in industry terms we refer to as working managers, meaning you have your own portfolio of work that you're responsible for in addition to leading all the people. I wish companies would stop doing that, but that's a whole nother conversation. So they have so much on their plates, and yet to keep up with all the changes that are happening, and a lot of times, they are affected by the change themselves personally, but they have to sort of keep that aside and first deal with helping the people that they support and still deliver on all their work um, commitments. So there itself, you have like three buckets there, and each of them is so full, so heavy. And then what kind of support do they get from top leadership? Because see, in the technology space primarily, like software and product companies, all the mid-level leaders end up being, roles in such as either like project managers, program managers, or scrum guides, agile coaches. And somehow executive leaders and organizations seem to think that, oh, that we can do without them. Where's the value? Because we all these type of roles end up sitting being considered as a cost center, and so they're an overhead, and they're not billable depending on the type of work. Of course, sometimes they are. So that's the other challenge, right? So mid-level leaders are stuck. They are overburdened. They are stretched thin like nobody's business. They're burned out. So you look at any of those stats. If their cups are empty, how are they expected to be a source of support and strength and leadership for the teams that they lead? So I think that's the other piece. So one, I would say, not knowing how relevant they are and how can they continue to remain relevant. The second piece is the cultural intelligence and being able to work across different demographics and different geographies. And the third element is really who's there to support them, not having, dealing with full plates, overflowing plates all the time. And then still the expectation is that they're there to support others, knowing fully well that the large parts of the organization might think that they're dispensable.
And you touch on something key there where it's like their buckets or their plates, it's constantly being added to, it's never being taken away.
Yes.
And something that just came to mind for myself as well. It's like sometimes when I think of program, I think of it's not very as agile as we need it to be, especially when in a business environment where it's so fast paced, it can change at any time. The relevance piece is also there. So my question to you is maybe what's one thing that organizations can do to effectively support these mid-level leaders at an agile pace potentially?
It's so hard to pick one thing. To me, it would be the support that the executive leaders and leaders above the middle management can provide to them, taking into account, when there are changes, making sure that they are involved from as much as beginning as possible. Because I understand that not all changes, sometimes these changes cannot be talked about openly for whatever reason. It could be financial, it could be related to layoff or whatever the reason may be. But being aware and being intentional in involving the mid-level as early as possible in the process. So to me, it boils down to the type of leadership that the mid-level leaders are themselves exposed to, because that's what really trickles down. And so top-notch leadership being provided to them, being treated with respect, being communicated, and how early on in the process you're communicated to, and what level of information you're provided. To me, that's one way of showing respect, preparing them, investing in them as human beings that are important to the success of the business, and not as some, oh yeah, you're just a program manager, and one program manager is the same as the other one, so it's what's the big deal. So treating these core human skills as they're supposed to be, instead of just that's the other thing, right? Soft skills. I cannot stand that term because nothing about soft skills, the so-called soft skills, is soft, and nothing about the so-called soft skills is easy to learn. It all takes practice, and none of these are taught in our schools anywhere in our education system. At least the ones that I have been exposed to. Right? Things are changing now. I do understand that, but so coming back to your question. The support that organizations and leaders can provide is really role modeling that leadership to the mid-level leaders themselves, communication, trust, and respect. And these are not such nebulous terms. There are actions and behaviors associated with each of these traits. So exposing your mid-level to that is going to help them. Once they see that, I'm not saying it's going to happen 100% of the time, but there's an increased probability of them showing the same thing down to their teams. And I will say this from my own personal experience: this leader that I was talking about, who I is a close friend and a mentor now, the executive leader who was my executive sponsor in a few years ago in my career, and we noticed that. So his entire organization. So we were, I think, about 7 of us that used to report to him. He was a COO. We all felt so informed because we used to do our daily syncs with him, and there was communication both ways. We were able to bubble up our team's concerns, customers' concerns, etc., in the daily sync, receive guidance, or not only just from him but the other 6 people. So. And for me, that was a role model. So I made sure that everything down, so I had the same set of processes for my team. And I'm so proud to say, even till date, it's been close to 10 years now, that my team felt so informed and so supported, and they were aware of it. Like, they knew that all teams were not the same, that some of their colleagues did not have the same experience, although we were part of the same company. Right? So it does work, but it takes time. So, provide the support to the mid-level leaders, believe in them, and treat them like they are the leaders that you want them to be. If you treat them like that, they are going to be. So I think that's the biggest piece.
Well, thank you for sharing that perspective. And I kind of want to ask you on the flip side of it then, because I believe that when it comes to leadership, it's a two-way street, right?
Yes,
There's only so much your leader can do. So the better that we can help our leaders help us, the more fruitful our career could be, right? And one of the things that you kind of touched on that really resonated with me is pitching the relevancy of your value that you can create at a company, especially as times change. So if you could offer just one piece of advice to mid-level leaders who are looking to thrive in their career, what would that piece of advice be?
Learn the business. Understand what your company is all about. What are your revenue streams? How do you make money? What are the different departments? What are the different functions? And what is the flow of information and work in your company, in your business? When I say business, not just your business unit. This is a mistake I've seen people make time and time again, that they stay within their sort of swim lane, if you will, because there's so much going on. I don't have the time nor the energy to figure out what's going on in my next lane. But that's a critical mistake that a lot of folks make. A large part of my success within organizations and in whatever role I take on, and what I do today as a solopreneur, is that I have always leaned into my cross-functional interests. I have diverse interests in my personal life as well. And one of my strengths is spotting patterns. And so once I'm able to connect the dots, that's one of my strengths. So it is important for me to, in all my time as a project and program manager, and later on managing a portfolio of clients, I'm not just looking at a client by client, I'm looking at the whole thing. And then having the ability to come down, from the 30,000 feet view to a 30 feet view, the ability to span that and the ability to span across. Because if you or your customer is having a problem, and I'm being very specific in this technology implementation, B2B SaaS product implementation space, as an example, a lot of mid-level leaders I've seen make the mistake of just being focused on what they need for their customers, their teams, with very little empathy nor understanding of what is happening in the ecosystem. So let's say if your customer post-implementation is complaining about the high number of issues that they're facing in their product, if you just want to resolve that without understanding that, oh, by the way, my production support team just had 5 resignations and they're short-staffed and they don't have the transfer of knowledge happening, so there's so much. So having that empathy, there's a term for it, wide-angled empathy. Having that empathy that encompasses the ecosystem so that you understand what's going on. That would be my one piece of advice. Learn your business, understand what are the different functions, go have virtual coffees, in-person coffees, whatever, meet people, network across the organization because they are also your allies. A lot of us tend to believe, or we are conditioned to believe that one way for growth is vertical is the most impactful of growth in your career. I'm here to tell you that it's not. And so most of us tend to focus on managing up, and we forget that building your peer networks is one of the most important things you can do for your career success.
Love that, because even when I think back to one of my recent roles within the HR team, I think the value, especially when you're going through a system implementation and everyone is running with their hair on fire kind of analogy, right? Because we're all trying to learn a new system, trying to learn the implications. You learn about bugs along the way, and then it just really impacts your workflow. Like, you're not as efficient as you used to be because, again, it's the early phase of adoption that's really difficult. But when you have people that are across the different functions that have empathy, who have your back, and it's like, hey, like, let's be patient with them.
Yeah.
We're all going through this together. I think it creates a magic that I think people really underestimate because they're so focused and hyper zoomed in on their day to day and just being able to like stay above water, essentially. So I guess this ties into my second last question as we slowly wrap up our conversation is, when it comes to unleashing the potential of individuals and organizations, what do you think is the first thing that comes to mind?
I want to take a dual perspective here. So from the point of view of the individual, to me, it's self-awareness and self-leadership. Showing up as a leader, I always say that leadership has nothing to do with positional power or titles. To me, it's about personal power over positional power. I could be an individual contributor, a software developer, an HR consultant, an HRBP, an individual contributor in my role. Does not prevent me from showing up as a leader, because to me that is an individual trait. It has got nothing to do with you're not a function of leadership is a function of who you are as an individual. And so practicing those skills instead of waiting for getting into that role, being promoted into a leader's role at whatever level, I think that's something I would say from an individual standpoint. How do you show up? What does that mean? How do you communicate? Are you able to communicate in a way that you're able to influence decisions and create impact? Are you able to collaborate with others? Are you able to create that sense of shared understanding? So these are all things that you don't need people reporting to you to be able to, for you to do them. So that's the individual perspective. Outside in, so what can other leaders or organizations do to unleash the potential of a mid-level leader in this context? Is one, creating those opportunities for intentional conversation around the individual's development as well. Because first of all, not everyone believes in the power of regular one-on-one conversations. It could be even 30 minutes, but it's worth its weight in gold. And even companies and leaders that do them, invariably they get converted into task-based updates. Setting aside time to focus on the individual's growth, their aspirations, their fears, limitations, all of that. That's how, one, you model that leadership behavior to them. And two, you create that time and space for them to really talk about these things. And then there's a lot of power in that. The moment you're able to take time to reflect on what is it that I really want to do, how do I want to be? We focus so much on the doing. If you also start focusing on what kind of individual do you want to show up as, so to me, it all boils down around awareness. Now, there's a lot that us as individuals can do to build our own awareness and our own sense of agency that leads into you showing up as a leader. And two, folks around us, the external environment, because the external environment plays a big role, because that's what decides what kind of access to opportunity you have and things like that. So again, if the outside environment is able to provide the same stimuli in a way to the individual. To me, that's a powerful combination.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that perspective. And one last question for you is when it comes to the work that you're doing, whether it's in your personal or professional life, what's one thing that you're working on that you're really excited about?
I want to answer the question slightly differently. Something I want to do more of is helping mid-level leaders, particularly women in tech, folks like me who look like me and speak like me, really understand the mountain of strength and power that they're sitting on, and to become aware of it and use it with intention, and channel it to create the kind of workspaces and teams that they want to do. A lot of us, I think, tend to wait for something from outside to do that for us. And the second thing is, I want to do through my work, both one-on-one coaching and group coaching within organizations and team settings. So one of my flagship programs is Unpacking Leadership, leading self, others, and change. Work with mid-level and leaders across multi-medium businesses to really help them unleash what's within. We don't have to seek a lot of, we think we have to seek out a lot, but there's a lot within. And if we do that in a group setting, and then, let the ripple effects take over. So that's what I'm excited about doing as well. And I would love to do more of that.
I can't wait to see the impact that you're going to make through your work, especially in the new year. I think it's very, very important. And the overall theme that I'm really noticing with your story and the advice that you've provided as well is the importance of self-leadership.
Yes.
And just really owning that space of, it's like, where can I create value? Because I think if you can continue to have that mindset, you'll stay relevant, right? Because you're solving business problems that need to be solved instead of just your head is in the sky and just doing something that's totally left field, right?
Yeah. You said it so well. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you again for sharing your story and your advice. And to everyone else who's tuned into another episode, thank you so much for your time and attention. It means more than you'll know. And I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.